Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today, we have a new package straight off the airplane. This is the CR-10 V2. So, with the CR-10 V2, Creality have included a bunch of the upgrades that people either add after the fact, some of those being right from Creality, like the Z supporting rods that they offer, and included them right in the printer out of the box. They've also included the silent steppers, which they offer as an upgrade for their other printers. So this has the 22.8 TMC drivers on the board right out of the gate. So first, we just have the user's manual, and then we'll be pulling out the base here. They've kept the standard external box format. You know, some people really love that, especially if you're putting it in an enclosure. You can keep all the electronics out of the hot area. Does it look familiar? But I understand that they're boasting a newer firmware, so I would assume Marlin 2, hopefully. And then there'll be a little bit of a different menu than you're used to. Small sample spool. Box of assembly components. The rubber feet are not attached to the base anymore, and they're gigantic. There's 4 of those. There we go. So these are the supporting rods. They sell these in a kit for all kinds of printers, and you can also jimmy rig them on non-Creality machines. To just stiffen up the Z, especially if you're printing tall objects, you might find that there's a little bit of resonating or wobbling. There we go. All right. So just with everything laid out here, I've been kind of admiring or analyzing the changes that they made. Some of them seem pretty insignificant. I'll just start with one of those. So on the bottom here, on the previous CR-10, you kind of had a mess of wires that you would just like lay underneath the printer, specifically for the Y and the second Z, far away from the control box. And they've just run these little clips in the channel so that the wires are all nice and contained. They've got a ribbon style connector for the bundle of cables that used to come up to the X motor area. So that's all different. The motor for the Y here, so the previous motor used to be sticking out the back further, so you needed further depth in your table or your cabinet or wherever you were putting it. So now that's kind of shrunk. And also you don't have that second kind of idler wheel to help guide the belt over the edge of the 2020 as it goes towards the motor. So the motor is mounted underneath now. This particular version has a 3D printed bracket for the end switch, for the Y limit switch. And then on the front side of the Y, they've kept kind of the traditional bracket that they had for tension adjustment, but it's completely enclosed now. Funny enough, online someone had a story of catching their beard in there while they were watching a print on that first layer. So your beard is not going to get caught anymore. But that will make it a little more cumbersome if you ever do have to change that idler. But honestly, that's so infrequent, it's not really a big deal. There's another quality of life, wire management thing here, just a little clip to kind of contain the hotbed cable, so that it's not just left completely loose, it's at least fixed in one position there. So I've already pulled some of the assembly tools and screws out of the box. The first thing that we're going to do is put the feet on the base here, because I don't want it resting on the little box back here. So there are tapped holes actually in the corners for these bolts to go through. And the manual references the M5 by 25s for the uprights. That really only leaves us these M5 by 30s for the feet. So they give you little lock washers. use them or not, doesn't matter. And they seem almost ridiculously long, as if they'll poke right out the other side. And they don't need to be super tight either, just enough that they're not going to come loose. So, if you are flipping this over like I did, just be careful that the bed doesn't go flying, because there's really no resistance. And the bed, since I've mentioned it, pull this plastic off, is that textured, I think they call it silicon carbide or something, but that textured porous glass material. In my experience, this sticks fantastically. You just need to up your temps a little bit from what you're used to, depending on what build surface you're coming from, of course. So now we're gonna put the upright on. So just like the CR-10, this sits up here. Let's just raise this up. Because if I rested it like that, the nozzle may very well just like smack the bed. So by turning the, let me show you. By turning the couplers here, we can raise the bed, or raise the X axis this way. That should be enough. There we go. Right there. All right. And then the M5 by 25 that I mentioned earlier is to bolt through the bottom and into those upright pieces. These ones as well have lock washers. And if I'm lucky, I'll be able to do it on the table, but usually I just hang it over the edge of the table to really have a good line of sight. Yeah. So I'm going to put them all in loose. I'll kind of square everything up and then I'll give them a final tightening. Just making sure that both sides are flush with the side rails of the base frame. And then I'm just going to tighten them down just a little bit. One more thing when I was under there that I noticed is they still have obviously the insulation under the heat bed. And it is a 24 volt system now. So the original CR-10 was 12. And that doesn't sound like much to some, but when you're trying to push a lot of wattage at 12 volts down really thin cables, specifically for the heat bed, you're supposed to up the gauge of the cables, really. The cables can end up heating up. So it's a lot easier for you to push more voltage at less amperage to get the same wattage. And typically the beds end up heating up faster. So those rubber legs are really soft. They grip the table. So let's start connecting those wires that we pointed out earlier. So we have dual Z, just like the CR-10S. Wire for one side, and then for the other. The Y-axis motor was already pre-connected from the factory, so we don't have to do anything there. And as far as the base frame is concerned, we're basically done. We're going to unpackage these. So these will go from the top here down to the front corner and stiffen up any kind of forward to back flex that may exist in this upright. So just like they would have included in the kit that came with these, if you bought it separately, there are brackets that attach to the top of the upright to give you a mounting location for these. So these brackets have one tapped hole, two untapped holes. The two untapped have bolts that go through and T-nuts that go in there like that. And then we have a tapped hole to attach the little eye bolt that goes in the end of these. You'll see that in just a second. So the small M5 bolts that are in here and the hammer nuts, they're T-nuts. I'm going to go through these untapped holes. in the bracket. Okay. And then grab the right Allen key for them. Yep. And just make sure that as you twist them, that the hammer nuts spin inside this track. We need them to both engage. You can't see the end one here that I'm doing unless you take off the end cap off the upright, but the other one you could look through here. Okay, so there's that. Now we may need to adjust how far out it is. We don't want to be pressing the rods outward. We want them to just kind of come straight down. But for now, I'll just leave it like that. And then do the same on the other side. Okay. The assembly of these is pretty easy. Doesn't matter which side you put this in. So you have a kind of just a long threaded rod here. Screw it about halfway into one side. And then what I do is just hold it still with my fingertip while I screw in the other side. Otherwise, you might not actually be threading it into this new side. You might just be screwing it in the other end the whole way. Just so that it's kind of equally in both. And then once we get far enough down that I can't really hold it anymore, just whichever side it goes in, doesn't really matter. They're both threaded in quite a ways. Give that good tightening. And we'll do that to the other one as well. Now for the other end, we have these nuts here. Slide the nut onto the eye bolt, and this will give us a way to tension against the end here. So these eye bolts will end up being extended a little bit, not sure how far yet, but what we'll do is we'll tighten the eye or the nut against the rod to secure the eye bolt in place so that there's no chance of it moving. Now if we're lucky, in the support rod kit, they give you a tap to tap the end of the 2020 down here, because these need to bolt into that. Up here, remember we're screwing into the tapped hole in this bracket. If we're lucky, these should already be done. Yes, they are. So we have a couple more of these small screws left, and those are going to go through the eye of the eye bolt and into here. Now here's a good example. There's no clearance there. I'm already hitting the extrusion. So that's one of the reasons why we would need to extend the length of the eye bolt to give us the clearance required. And then I'll just hand tighten this down. We'll really have to secure those when we're done. But then with that extended, you can angle it without the bottoming out on the 2040 here, the side rail. So I like to keep them even as much as possible anyway. So I'll just unthread them and then just do a quick kind of eye check, see if we're in the ballpark. Not even close. They are rather long, so don't worry about unscrewing them a ways. There's still a lot of threads in there. I'm going to screw the top one in, just finger tight. Okay. And then the bottom one here, you'll have to probably play with this a little bit, tightening, loosening to line it up perfectly with that hole. And once you've got it, there you go. So now I'm going to tighten both the screws, and then we'll double back and tighten that nut that's on the eye bolt to lock that in place. So this one here, because the side of this upright rail is flush with the side of this, and we're bolting into something that's also flush with that, we would want this bracket to be completely flush with the side of here. So I did that on this side. On this side, we'll just loosen this. It'll almost naturally want to straighten itself, and then just tighten it back down. So now all that's tight. Let's take our little flat wrench and just tighten those nuts. And this one is going to go this way. There. And now, like already you can tell the difference if we didn't have a wobbly table, but if you put pressure forward and back, you can kind of see the upright bend, and then over here, if you push it forward and back, it'll basically just slide it across the table. There's no way for that to flex anymore. So lather, rinse, repeat. I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. All right, so let's connect the control box. Slide this over here. And as we're about to start connecting the two of these, I just want to discuss a couple changes as well here. So this looks very similar to what we originally saw on the CR-X, CR-10S Pro, for example. There's a little daughter board in here, and all of the bits are covered by the shroud. We also have a fixed filament runout sensor. So on the CR-10S, it was kind of just an afterthought that clipped on and fell off half the time. They're also back to the all metal extruder lever. It is not a Titan extruder or Bondtech extruder. The documentation basically said that it was, or that it would be included, and in these ones it's not. It's the standard direct one-to-one kind of extruder that we've seen all the way back to the CR-10. And the little tension adjustment screw. It is nice that they included the little retaining clips to hold the Bowden tube couplers to keep pressure on that, so that the teeth should constantly be biting. So there's less chance of it moving in or out on its own. And then on the hot end, we have an MK8 nozzle, kind of standard MK8 heater block, but the heatsink portion is very much E3D clone. Don't know if it would be a V5 or 6 clone off the top of my head. We do have a 5015 blower, and the blower, even though it's mounted on one side, there is an air channel through here and ducts on either side of the nozzle. So that's great, much better than just single side cooling. For connecting the box here, it's not really a ribbon cable per se, but it's a different connector, much more like what you'd see in a PC. And this connects into that bottom box there. So that bottom box acts as a breakout, it seems, for the two Z wires as well as the Y. So now we only have one cable coming from the control box. And then here we have a larger version of that, and that's going to come, and they're keyed, so they only go in one way. That's going to come to the top of here. So if you compare this to what you saw with the CR-10, where you did have a few bundles of wires actually, but then they broke out to multiple smaller wires. We only have these two bundles that are hardwired into the control box and nice and neat. And then we have the third one, which is still the aircraft connector, and that just screws into the back of the control box. And it's also keyed, so it only goes in one orientation. So I was about to grab the spool holder and I realized we don't have auto bed leveling, so where's our Z limit switch? Here it is. It's on a little plastic board. There's a switch. There's two hammer nuts that are pre-assembled, and so this allows us to adjust it. And the original one was down the side here like this, so we'll just keep that the same. It's nice that couple things are different. It's nice that we have infinite adjustability for our Z limit switch. Once upon a time, we had those T brackets that reinforced this joint, and two of the screws, or one of the screws anyway, was used to hold the Z limit switch here. So you couldn't really slide it up and down. You were in a fixed position, so you'd have to print yourself a different bracket to be able to adjust it. And because of the support rods, there's really absolutely no reason to try to reinforce that with a simple little T bracket. They're more than well enough enforced there. And I think we need this to be somewhere around here. I'll leave these loose because we're going to definitely have to play with its positioning. I want each of the corners to have a bunch of tension, so I'm just tightening the bed. That's the right way. There we go. That one was super loose. Because I don't level my bed with the springs all the way loose. I want the bed to be as solid as possible. I do want it to have some give, but adding a little bit of pre-tension there. And then I can use that as kind of a general frame of reference. Lower by hand. See, I'm already hitting the Z switch, and my bed is far too low. There's a gigantic gap under the nozzle. So we'll lower this switch a little bit, and then just double check again. And more. And there is a limit to how far down you can have this. The blue bracket here on the back will actually hit the stepper motor. So you can't go too far down. Okay, that is about as far down as that can go. So I'm going to tighten this up so it's not moving at this point. There is one wire hiding under here. It's a 3-pin, smaller cable. The other wire we grabbed was for the stepper motor earlier. And this would have been easier to do before I assembled it, but it's keyed, it only goes in one way. Slide that into the Z limit switch. Perfect. Okay. Now we can move on to the spool holder. Spool holder is the same as it has been for a long time. There's no reason to change it. There's nothing wrong with it. And then we've got 2 thumb screws. Well, 3, they gave us a spare. And these just attach the spool holder to, I always do this, that is wrong, this is right. Great. So let's power it on and make sure everything moves how we would expect it. Make sure we've connected everything. No power, that's good. This is a good example. So on the side, there is a voltage selector. For us here, I don't have to be worried. I'm never going to blow anything. But if you're in Europe or 230, 240 volt country, you are going to want to check this. So right now it's set to 230 volts. We'll switch it. There we go. So it's set to 115. So now it should actually power on. There we go. So let's go through the menus a little bit. So CR-10 V2, kind of a typical layout. We have your hot end set temperature and current temperature for the bed and set temperature, cooling fan speed, which is off right now. Our flow rate's at 100%, which is normal, and it's ready. That's good. In the menu, we can see at the bottom there's no TF card, so we haven't put in the SD card yet. That's fine. We're just going to preheat. So initially, let's just move the individual axes. Okay, so X moves. Let's move Y. Good. Y moves forward and back. And Z. It's moving up, that's a good sign. Okay, so now we're gonna home all axes. Auto home. And you hear that? Silence. Perfect. Okay, just gonna tighten that one a little bit. Okay. So there should be, if we're lucky, in the menu here, an option to preheat PLA. Preheat that. So you can see that that has set the hotbed to a set temperature of 45, and we're currently at 21. It hasn't decided to heat up the hot end. So I'll do that manually. Under control, temperature, set the nozzle temperature, let's set it to like 200. All right, we'll wait for that to get up to temperature. All right, so we're right about up to temperature now. What I find interesting is when manufacturers or firmware configurers choose to set the cooling temperature, the cooling fan, to 100% while they're preheating the nozzle for PLA. I mean, you never run the cooling fan, the part cooling fan when you're on your first layer anyway, so I'm not sure why I would want that while I'm preheating. Regardless, now we want to do the paper drag method of leveling our bed. So they've chosen not to have a bed leveling kind of helper screen that will jump you corner to corner in here. So we could either manually move X and Y around, or you can disable the steppers. When you disable the steppers, you run the risk of the Z moving on you. Like if you push down, the Z motors are not engaged. So you need to be very careful here. And you want to just push left and right, forward and back on the bed. Okay. So somewhere in the corner, maybe 30, 40 millimeters in from the corner, we want the nozzle to be just about touching the bed like that. And then it's kind of an obnoxiously large piece of paper. It's better. So we can hear that drag, that's good. Now as we move this across, suddenly no drag at all. So I've made some pretty significant adjustments as I've gone around. You're gonna wanna go around a second time, but I raised this corner, I raised this corner a little bit back here, but now that I move back around, this may be too high. So as I'm moving it around, I'm keeping the paper underneath the nozzle just so I don't gouge the bed. And as I start to move it forward, I can already feel that it's going to be too high in this corner. So I'm just gonna tighten that down a little bit more. Okay, and then we'll go around once more. So I'm ready to load up filament and do some test prints, print some test prints off the SD card. Notice I said SD card, not micro SD. So another one of the changes that they made. They use a full-size SD card slot instead of micro SD, and also they use a micro USB instead of the mini USB that they were using before. So micro USB being a much more common cable these days. A lot of the cell phones were using them prior to USB-C, and obviously we can easily plug in a SD card into our laptop without any kind of adapter. They do still give you a SD to USB adapter, and actually it's kind of nice. So it'll take micro, it'll also take full-size SD if you put it in the right way. There we go. And then you can plug that into your laptop or PC if you don't happen to have an SD card reader. All right, we're back. It's a few days later anyway. And in the meantime, before we did the prints, Paul actually installed the BL Touch on here. So that's why you see that there, and it wasn't there before. So check out Paul's in-depth guide on installing the BL Touch. The link is in the description below. Our first print, we just did a little kind of flat cube shape. Turned out beautifully. And we're using the Cicada Random Colors filament. So this is NatureWorks Ingeo 3D 850, which is like a PLA plus. So it's really, it's got better impact resistance than regular PLA. And it's a little bit stiffer, if I had to guess. But it's great material, and apparently it could be painted without being primered. I haven't tested that myself. But so we did a little flat cube thing here. It turned out fine. And so we kicked off a filament shelf bracket. That was about a 28-hour print. This was 30% infill, 2 perimeters. And this turned out absolutely beautiful. And I mean, between the machine and the tolerances in this filament, the walls are just buttery smooth. If you handed this to someone and had them guess, they may actually guess that you did like 0.16, 0.12. but this is just standard 0.2 millimeter layers, and it's just buttery smooth. It's fantastic. So this is really great filament for, I mean, if you don't care about the color for anything, but it's great filament for rapid prototyping or things that you're gonna paint anyway. So the machine performed admirably. It's nice that it has inherited some pieces from the CR-10S Pro, so it's using very similar X carriage. It's using a filament runout sensor that's permanently mounted instead of just clipped on. It's got the stabilizer bars, so the Z is super rigid, and they've still got the control box, except a much better wire management going on with this printer. So I think it's a great replacement for the CR-10 and CR-10S line of printers at a slightly lower price point than something like the CR-10S Pro. Hopefully you found all that useful. Remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. Let me know if you have any questions or comments on this video or anything else you've seen on the channel. Thanks for watching.